The 5-1 profile, known as the Heretic Investigator in traditional human design, or an ecocentric human design, the disruptor researcher. You are here to disrupt the way that it has always been done, burn it down, break it, and start anew. You are here to blaze a new trail, perhaps before your time. You will find your way by cultivating and nourishing a foundation. One by one, you light the way, illuminating the path for many. This new way, once thought of as crazy, is the catalyst for a life better lived, a life with more ease. You establish a new standard, bringing many together with your power. Step into the light and be seen when it's time. Honor the timing of your life to be seen or not. This is the key for you to thrive. So we've got the 5-1 profile here. And, this is a profile that has the highest universalizing power of the transpersonal or left angle profile. So where the bigger number comes first. And these are people who, fifth lines, as you know, live in the projection field. So 4, 5, 1, their first projection is a little bit different than the other fifth line profiles in that it's usually positive. And then the second projection is usually negative. So we want to keep that in mind as we go through this. So I think it's important to understand that the first line foundation, this is the authoritarian, this is the conservative. These are the people who have to have like all the information in place before they move forward. This is the first line is the foundation of the hexagram. And then you have the fifth line. This is the disruptor. This is the general, the hoarder, the seducer, the magnetic. This is kind of the rebel of all of the lines in human design. And this lives on the second story if we use the metaphor of the house to explain the lines. And this is the second story, but it's the second story window with like the lights on, but the windows closed, and there's an air of mystery about it. Okay. So when we look at this, we have to understand that 5-1s are mysterious and magnetic, and they really have this sort of nonconformity about them. And they kind of differ from the 3-5 in that what they're here to disrupt tends to be a bit more veiled, right? So we have to remember that 4 or 5-1, the first projection is almost always positive, right? It's a positive projection. And the reality is this is a profile that carries a great deal of responsibility. They have a responsibility to almost be a superior human. And, they live in the projection field, right? The projection field's on the mind side. And they are often very misunderstood by other people, and people don't ever really truly understand the depth of their being. And the reality is they take their knowledge and their research and the foundation that they've established and they universalize it. And the intention for them is always to impact large numbers of people. But the challenge here is that they have to have a keen understanding of when it's time to come in and universalize. And that first line empathy can really trip them up because the reality is they have this tendency to want to be a savior. And they say things like, "Oh, I can do that and help other people," even though that's not the thing that they originally came to disrupt. And when that happens, we call this rather burning at the stake, like a 3-5. In the 5-1, this is a fall from grace for the disruptor researcher, right? This is a fall from grace. And if they have a 6-2 in their life, the 6-2 can usually kind of help them soften this fall from grace, that second projection, if you will. And the reality for a 5-1 is when they have this fall from grace, when that second projection comes, it's often because they stayed out too long, saving the day, and they didn't honor the timing, or they didn't answer the right call, like they let their empathy get the best of them, or they didn't have an effective solution for the call, or they weren't actually in touch with the people. So one of the things that's important to remember for a 5-1, more so than any other fifth line, is that they have to have a practical, pragmatic solution that works for everyone for whatever it is that they're here to disrupt. Whereas in a 3-5, their solution doesn't have to actually work for everyone. And so this profile in particular, they're experts at their craft. Like, they enjoy coming in to disrupt when all else has failed, because they're certain, because they've established such a solid foundation, that their solution will actually work for other people. Like, they're very effective at getting results for whatever that one thing it is that they've gotten for results for people. But the reality is timing is really important for them, and answering the correct projections is also really key. So for these people, they must only answer the projection when they feel super secure. Okay. And that feeling of secureness or insecurity, right, whichever one comes up, is not the right projection for the 5-1. And the 5-1 has to learn to realize that not every projection is for them. And they have to put their ego aside, and they have to put their empathy aside. And they really have to understand that projections bring possibility, but that's not a guarantee for success. And oftentimes the 5-1, they can see that people need help, and their empathy takes over, and they stay out in the projection field too long, and they get themselves in trouble. But the reality is, a 5-1 isn't here to rush things. They're methodical, they're deliberate, they're calculated. But the reality is, they have to be really discerning about what they're willing to fall from grace about. And the 5-1 ideally or optimally gets their homework done, gets prepared behind closed doors. They hoard information, right? They demand answers, they cultivate details. And then only when they feel attractive and secure and magnetic do they step out into the projection field and put their message out there. So the reality is, these are people who are going to need time behind closed doors alone, preparing to answer the call, right? And they're creative, and they can leverage their sort of unorthodox way of seeing the world in order to, step out into the projection field with their practical solution. So it's important to understand that this is a profile who spends a lot of time observing the world around them, and they don't necessarily fully reveal themselves to other people. They're often deep individuals who need time alone in order to sort out their foundation. And it is in this time where they are alone and withdrawn that they build up the confidence and the safety and the security and the strength and the resources in order to actually create that practical, pragmatic solution. So the 5-1's here, and they're hoarding their information, right? And they're hoarding all this knowledge, and they're gaining all this information, and they're getting more and more projections, but they're like, my foundation's not there yet. My foundation's not there yet. My foundation's not there yet. And then one day the foundation is there, and they have all these projections that have built up, and then they can step out into the field. They can come out from behind their window and their curtain, and then they can universalize. And so the 5-1 ideally thrives when there are systems and processes in place to be relied on. But this requires them to be very disciplined and patient, and remembering to withdraw once their projection has been fulfilled. And I've seen this with 5-1s that I have as clients. They stay out too long, right? They put out an offer or a program or a course or whatever. They help somebody with something, and they're like, the other person's talking to them, and, they're projecting on them, and they're like, oh, actually I can help you with that too. And ultimately what happens is they can't fulfill on that second projection the way that they can on the first projection. And they actually get themselves into, a fall from grace, right? Their reputation is hurt. And the reality is, 5-1s are incredibly powerful and influential, and they're here to change the world for the better. but they have to make sure that they honor the timing of their life. That's really key for them in order to actually, create beauty and creativity and solutions for the people. So the challenges of the 5-1, the disruptor researcher, are many, right? I don't want to sugarcoat it here. They live in the projection field. That is never an easy thing to do. I know, I'm a 3-5. So these are people who, according to Ra, the founder of human design, the hopes and dreams of humanity rest on the shoulders of a 5th line. And so we have to understand that these are people who are constantly being projected on, and they have to reckon and contend with that projection. And the reality is they have to be willing to fall from grace so that they can bring their universalization to life. 5-1s don't tend to fall as hard, or their reputation doesn't tend to suffer as much as that of a 3-5 or a 5-2 or a 2-5. But it's important to understand these are still people who have to make sure that the foundation that they're bringing to light is really solid. And I've seen this a lot with 5-1s in multiple different stages and aspects of business. They think that they're ready to do something, and the reality is it's far more complicated than it needs to be, and it's not really practical or pragmatic, and the solution doesn't necessarily work for everyone. Or they try to rush through the process because they think like, I got to hurry up. And they get into this not self of their mind, and then they step out into the projection field, and it just doesn't work for them. And they have to understand that it's not a matter of if a fall from grace happens, it's a matter of when. But they can actually leverage a 6-2 in order to help them repair their reputation. And it can be very helpful to have an ally of a 6-2 for a 5-1 in their lives. Because the reality is we trust 6-2s. We trust the word of a 6-2, right? We just do. And so, we trust the word of the 6-2. So the 6-2 can speak on behalf of the 5-1 and their reputation or not, right? And so understanding who you have in your circle might be really helpful for you to establish more trust and repair your reputation when a fall from grace happens. As I mentioned, the 5-1 is incredibly empathetic because empathy is the bonding strategy of the first line. But the empathy here can seduce, right? Because the 5th line sort of seduces people to it. The 5th line with that 1 might actually seduce itself out into the world because of the fact that there's empathy there before they have all these details in place, before all the knowledge has been acquired. And again, this happens from a fall from grace, and the 5-1 ends up really hurt when this happens. So being really mindful of this as a 5-1 is incredibly important to living out your design correctly. The other piece to keep in mind is that strategy and authority are key here, and really understanding the timing of your life and paying attention to the timing of your life, and really having sort of this awareness around, is this a first projection or is this a second projection? Because the reality is, if they don't trust that timing of their life, if they let their empathy get the best of them, that fall from grace happens. And ultimately for a 5-1, that gives them like damage to their confidence and their attractiveness, and it shakes and rattles their foundation that they built. And these are people, they thrive on processes and systems, and they're often called to, implement new ways of doing things. But as a result, because they're so innovative, people are like, oh, well, since you did this, can you do that? And, that second projection is never good for a 5-1. So they become too powerful, too controlling, too disruptive to the other humans, even though they probably just came in and saved the person's day, right? Kind of ironic, right? So there's all of that. Then there's also answering the wrong projections, which is also very problematic for the 5-1, which again leads to damage in their attractiveness, damage in their confidence. And that tends to happen more so when they haven't had that really, really solid foundation. So when we think of this from the perspective of how do we actually support a 5-1 human in our lives, we have to remember that there's some questions we can ask the 5-1 in order to help them align to who they are. So questions like, am I attractive? Do I have enough knowledge? How do I know when I will have enough knowledge? How do I know when I will have a solid enough foundation? What other details or pieces might be missing? Is the solution practical enough for everybody? Do I or am I tuning into my strategy and authority? Does the timing of this feel correct for me? Have I worked out all the details for my practical solution? Have I outstayed my welcome? Is there a 6-2 in my life that can help me, can be of counsel to me, or help me rebuild my trust if I fall from grace? And what can I learn from, or what's a lesson I can learn when I've answered the wrong call? And lastly, is my support team projecting on me what they believe I should be, or am I actually owning all that I am? That is the 5-1 profile, the Heretic Investigator in traditional human design, or in ecocentric human design, the disruptor researcher. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a fantastic day.